Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to Syracuse basketball postgame. It's presented by Krause Health. And oh, so close Syracuse was to one of the great upsets in the history of Syracuse basketball. The Orange give Duke absolutely everything it's got. Get an extraordinary performance from a Boeheim, even with a Boeheim missing, but ultimately fall to Duke. Final score from Brooklyn, 88-79. Buddy Boeheim suspended for this game, but Jimmy Boeheim says, I got this, bro. 28 points from Jimmy Boeheim, the leading scorer in the game, which is extraordinary to think about, ladies and gentlemen, because in the matchup against Duke at the Carrier Dome back at the end of February, Jimmy Boeheim was all but helpless against that team. He had 2 points. He was in trouble the whole game. He could not crack the code inside with Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams. But today he was brilliant, hitting from the outside, ends up with 6 3-pointers on the day, 28 points total. Joe Girard with a huge first half for Syracuse. And the Orange threw everything they could at Duke, literally, guys, because they played man-to-man defense. It happened. I saw it. You saw it. We all saw it. They played triangle and 2. They mixed up defenses in the first half. They threw everything they had. And the kitchen sink, I believe, I saw flying around out there at the Barclays Center at this Duke team today. But it was some defensive plays down the stretch for Duke that ultimately got them the win. And Duke shifted strategy as well. I'm going to start highlighting some of your comments here in just a second here, ladies and gentlemen. But in terms of the basketball game, Duke was intent to shoot from the outside. That's what Syracuse was giving them in the first half. They go 6 of 22, and they completely shift gears. We'll go over the numbers here shortly, but Duke pounded the ball inside, and Syracuse did what it could to keep pace. They certainly did for a good part of the second half, but ultimately Banchero and Williams were just too much. Some key defensive plays down the stretch, notably from Williams and Banchero. Roach was huge off the bench for Duke today, hitting threes. So what Duke got in the second half is what they didn't in the first, a mix of the outside in the inside game. And the number 1 seed will move on in the ACC tournament. And this could all be over for Syracuse, folks. I don't see them getting an NIT bid. I don't see them accepting a bid to any other tournament out there, the CBI or some things that are out there. So we may have just seen the last game of the year, and what an effort it was for the Orange. And you guys are nailing it here in the comments. Dale, you got to respect the hustle, grit, and determination. To those who say Jimmy only plays because of his last name, have you even been watching? And it's sad that Buddy Boeheim couldn't play in his last game, but you know what? A stamp on the career of Jimmy Boeheim. If that's his last game, if that's Syracuse's last game of the year, what a validation for him. What a walk-off shot to go out with an effort like that against Duke after so many people question why Jimmy Boeheim was even playing for this team. Matt says it, great game, great effort. 4th foul on Swider, a real turning point. Matt, it really was. There was a 4th foul on Swider, a couple of questionable calls down the stretch. That flagrant 1 call on John Bolajak was a joke, an absolute joke. It wasn't Teddy Valentine this time. It was a different ACC officiating crew than yesterday's game, and we know the call they didn't make, which led to Buddy Boeheim's suspension with the ACC overruling them. But, man, there were some key calls that swung things the other way. A couple of cheapies on Swider, who ended up not following out of the game, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double-check myself there. No, he yet. So Swider got that 4th foul with 14 minutes or so to go, something in that range. Never fouled out of the game. So he was out there and just missed some shots down the stretch, and Syracuse ran out of gas just right at the end there, but not for lack of effort, man. It was something to watch today from Syracuse. Sports. That's why you got to love sports. It's why I do what I do, and you watch sports and you love sports, because this came out of nowhere. This is as David Goliath a matchup as it gets. Syracuse lost by 20 and 25 points in the first 2 games. They were over by halftime. But today, without Buddy Boeheim, without Jesse Edwards, without Benny Williams, with a, severely injured John Bolajak, a not 100% Barama Sidibe. Go through all the reasons why Syracuse should have been no way, shape, or form in this basketball game, but they were in it all the way. Duke just pulls away at the end here. As David says, no matter what, great game. Dale says 4th on Swider, a cheap play. I agree with that. Bonnie saying great game by Jimmy and Joe today. Where are all the haters now? Listen, Joe Girard off the ball, good things happen. What we got was a little bit of a preview of next year, right? Symir Torrance at point, Joe off the ball at the 2. We'll see if Justin Taylor, the freshman coming in, can work his way into the lineup at the 2. But you put Joe off the ball and just let him create offensively, good things happen. Ladies and gentlemen, good things happen. So we got a little preview of that. We got a little preview of the man-to-man defense that Syracuse could be playing next year. That was smart. Duke didn't see it coming. As my guy Steve says, if that's the last game, it's a great thing to finish the season feeling such pride in this team after a very frustrating year. Well said there by my guy Steve. Jerry with the note there, no cigar, almost a classic. Neil, excellent game. Sad for the end, but ref calls are ref calls. We didn't lose because of the calls. Duke was a much stronger team from this year. If this is the last for this team, thanks for the effort. I'm out of nitroglycerin pills now, but I love the cues. Thanks for the season, Brent. Neil and SoCal. Thank you, Neil, for all your great comments and hanging throughout the shows throughout the season. And I love this from Steve. That's a great line right there. Sports is about undying hope. Beware the believers, right? David says Symir and Girard will be a great backcourt next year. And if Syracuse can add, a couple names to that list, they're currently going after a couple of recruits that are out there in the guard position. I think this year proved you need depth at the guard position, right? Symir and Joe can make a great backcourt, but if you can mix in a Taylor, you can mix in, perhaps another player or two that they're looking at. Kadir Copeland comes in the class of next year, the top 25 class Syracuse has coming in. So, hey, we'll see how it goes. But we got a nice little jolt in the next season. And I do think that was the last game. We shall see. And Brian brings up Symir here. Listen, the improvement that Symir Torrance made down the stretch, a little bit of a hiccup there with the injury, of course, but he can attack the basket. We'll go over the numbers here in a minute. But the assist rate he has, just a distributor, a facilitator, someone that can just run the offense, no fear. The way he took on Duke today, the way he took on all comers down the stretch, you got to love it. And Jim Boeheim even said it at the postgame press conference yesterday about what a difference that Symir Torrance makes in this one. And look, we talked a lot about Buddy Boeheim yesterday. We weren't quite sure that, as Steve asked, who are they recruiting besides Mintz? Syracuse did throw an offer out there. I forget the young man's last name. You guys can jump in on this. Sky is his first name. He's a commit from Kentucky. He decommitted, and Syracuse at least threw him an offer. I don't think they're going to end up with him. He can end up playing pro ball somewhere, but that's the other guy they're going after at this point. But Judah Mintz is the main name, as you mentioned there. But look, we talked at length about the Buddy Boeheim thing. Look, the ACC had to do something. He punched a player in a premier game at their event. But what the ACC did an awful job of was explaining why. If you're going to do something like that, which is unprecedented, you're going over your officials. It was not called during the game, right? It was not called anything. They didn't call one foul in that situation, review it or anything. The ACC did not explain itself, and that's a poor job by them. And it wasn't for lack of effort. I can tell you my colleagues at syracuse.com really tried to pursue somebody from the ACC. They didn't make anybody available. And given the ACC's lack of credibility, think of the play David Collins knocks out Wendell Moore Jr. He gets a game. How much Grayson Allen got away with stuff. I mean, Chris Paul punches Julius Hodge in the groin in the ACC tournament, and it was Wake Forest that ended up suspending Paul, not the ACC. So if you're going to take an extraordinary measure to boot Buddy out of a game, you got to explain yourself. And they didn't do that. So it's a moot point now. It's amazing all the conversations we've had in the last 24 hours. Syracuse went out there and they clearly were inspired to play for Buddy at this point. So while you guys keep chatting here, I'm just going to jump in and give you some numbers from this one. Jimmy Boeheim leads all scorers with 28 points, 11 of 20 from the field, 6 of 9 from three-point range, 7 rebounds for him in all 40 minutes. An extraordinary effort considering how bad he played in the second. Again, both games really, but particularly the second game against Duke at the Dome. Joe Girard, most of this in the first half, ends up with 23 points, 7 of 17. He was 4 of 11 from three-point range, 6 rebounds on the day, a couple assists for Girard as he was off the ball. Cole Swider, 15 points to follow up his 28 yesterday. Got into foul trouble, but never fouled out. 4 of 15 today, 3 of 11 from three-point range. And then kind of a smattering here. Torrance, 7 points, but 11 assists. That's a career high that he topped from setting yesterday in a career high. Symir Torrance, what a boost for Syracuse down the stretch, and looking forward to seeing what he can do next year. Barama Sidibe didn't score, but man, 5 rebounds, couple great block shots in this game. John Bull got a couple of minutes there, but just couldn't go. His knee was just too tough. They put him in when Swider got the 4th foul, and he just couldn't go. Frank Anselm, 6 points, 4 rebounds. Not bad. You know, it's certainly better than what we've seen from Frank against better teams. He had 15 rebounds yesterday in the game. Florida State just kind of laid down and died for Syracuse, but a couple of nice plays for him. Overall, Syracuse shot 40%, 42% from 3-point range, 13 of 31. I mean, that's how you stay in a game with Duke. Duke, 48%. They shot 32 of 67. The Blue Devils end up 11 of 32 from 3-point range. 22 of those 32 3-pointers were taken in the first half. As we mentioned, they pounded the ball inside in the second half, and that's what did it. Points in the paint favors Duke, 40-14 at this point. Duke ends up out rebounding Syracuse 43-39. Syracuse did have the lead in that department for a lot of that game. And listen, you know, to be that close to Duke in the rebounding department is quite an accomplishment for Syracuse. 18 assists for the Orange. They had 23 yesterday, moved the ball well. Duke ends up with 24 assists on the day. Wendell Moore Jr. with 26 points for Duke. He led the way for them. Mark Williams didn't score in the first half, had 15 points in the second. Obviously, they went to him a lot. 16 rebounds for him, a double-double. Roach was huge off the bench for Duke today. He had 19 points, including 5 3-pointers. Keels with 14. Paolo Banchero, 10 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists. Great all-around game for him, but a great all-around effort for the Orange. So let's leave it to you to carry us home, friends. Sky Clark was the name of that recruit I was thinking of earlier. Thank you for that, Lynn. Appreciate that. John, I don't think they're eligible if they're below 500. Now, see, that's no longer the case. I understand why you would think that, though. That used to be the rule. To make the NIT, you had to be above 500. That is no longer the case. The NIT can take a team below 500. Now, the NIT is obligated to take certain teams, conference champions that don't make the NCAA tournament. There's kind of a list they have to go down. But, man, if you're the NIT and there's a spot for Syracuse, a team that just gave Duke a hell of a run here, why wouldn't you want Syracuse in the NIT? It's a brand-name team. They're coming off a great game. I don't know if Syracuse would want to play in the NIT, frankly. That's something that younger players would benefit from more. Why would Jimmy Boeheim want to play? I mean, Buddy would get another game, so you'd have that at least, and maybe these guys want to keep playing after the way they went after Duke today. You never know. It's always a kind of a feel and a tricky thing for players in terms of motivation, but they've got to get the invite, which is, I don't know if they're going to get it at this point. And that's the only one they would certainly consider playing in. Dave says, Axe, appreciate the post-game shows. Great place for fans and even the Boeheim haters. Every opinion counts. Go Cuse. David, that's what we're here for, man. I love the participation we get from you guys, the loyalty. I see in some of the names like you and Joe and my guy Mike here from El Paso, who via Syracuse, love it. And I'm going to leave some names out here, so forgive me. My guy Brian's been here a lot. I mean, I really appreciate you guys coming in all hours of the day, afternoon games, really late night games. The beauty of this, it's the internet. You guys are everywhere. You know, late games for us on the East Coast, on the West Coast. You're loving it because it's a reasonable time, but we've had some great interactions this year. And you're right, all opinions are welcome. Now, I might disagree with some of those opinions, but that's the beauty of this thing. It'd be boring if we agreed all the time, right? Matt says, Buddy admitted guilt before the ACC looked at it. Probably not a good move, but it shows his character and how he felt about what happened, going back to what we were saying about the Buddy Boeheim situation. Steve drops the numbers in. Torrance, 88 assists versus 25 turnovers. Joe, 137 versus 89. Yeah, Joe's not a point guard. And he's not going to be a point guard next year for the most part, and that is going to be a smart move for Jim Boeheim on that front. Too bad Cole couldn't get a hot little earlier. Good effort, though. As Dale says, now you got to wonder if Cole's coming back. Jim Boeheim said he wasn't. Cole Swider said he's going to talk to Coach Boeheim after the season, and that will take place now, I would imagine sometime this weekend. I think he'd be welcome back, considering what he did down the stretch. A veteran player with the 3-point shots, one more year of eligibility, get better on the defensive end. Syracuse is going to play some man-to-man next year, so any weaknesses Cole had in the zone, can be made up for it and some different looks. I hope he comes back. I'd love to see him come back, but certainly his choice is he's got 1 year of eligibility left, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there. But man, I'd love to see him back. What a good mix of, yeah, Mike, don't forget you in Nashville. Come on now, my guy, Mike. Like I said, I'm going to miss somebody. Marty in Florida, all the great people coming in here. Shout out to all you guys and gals. My guy, Ed, there you go. Go have a scotch. Too early in the day for scotch? No one's looking, right? Huh? It's never too early in the day for scotch. Yeah, it is. But I'll definitely have one later to kick back and relax after a pretty intense season, pretty up and down season for the Orange. And boy, it's weird because we're talking about this great game and this great effort for Syracuse, but that's it. It's like, wow, this is it. This is more than likely the last game. So, listen, Syracuse finished with a losing record. It's the first time it's ever going to happen under Jim Boeheim, barring any games coming up in the NIT. They did finish the regular season with a losing record. So I think people will certainly look at that and an eyebrow will pop up. But this Duke game gave them a moment. It gave them a signature moment in a loss. Okay, nobody wants a trophy from a loss. Nobody wants the old college try trophy. But man, you're only as good as your last game. You only remember your last game. So I think that's an encouraging note for the fans. It's an encouraging note for the team that, yeah, they lost to Duke, but without Buddy and all the circumstances surrounding everything, at least they went into the season. Steve was saying it earlier in his comment with, a great feeling and pride. Pride is the word. I think people are going to feel pride with this team, even with this loss. Now, it was an up and down season, man. It was a team that struggled on the defensive end. It just wasn't athletic enough. But look, we've said it a time or two on this post-game show. You can never question the heart, the grit, the guts, and the determination of this team. They played as hard as they could. They just, came up short in some situations, couldn't inbounds the ball against Miami, Wake Forest, North Carolina, right? There was that terrific back and forth overtime game against Indiana. Go back to that. Go back to the battle for Atlantis when they didn't quite do as well as they normally did. Colgate comes in, beats Syracuse 100-85. And maybe that was the first sign something was amiss, that maybe this just wasn't the same team for Syracuse. Colgate, by the way, shout out to them. They're back in the NCAA tournament. So how about Colgate? They they beat Syracuse, 100-85. They lose 8 of their next 9. Stabilize things, win 15 in a row to end the season. So what looked like a bad loss for Syracuse ends up being a loss to a tournament team. The loss to Georgetown's really going to sting because Georgetown ended up being one of the worst teams in college basketball this year. They didn't win a game in the Big East this season. So it was a roller coaster ride. It was up and down. There was another COVID pause, right? I'm just thinking of things off the top of my head. You guys tell me as we're, coming down the stretch here. I mean, what is it about this season that you guys are going to remember and think about here? And if it is the last game, if they get an NIT bid, then hey, we'll keep going and we'll do a post-game show and do all the things we do to watch this team. But it very likely could be their last game. So we got to do the thanks for the memories thing now when you think about this season. And to me, the fact that Jim Boeheim had a losing season is, you could just set your watch by it. 20 wins, go to the tournament, never a losing season. It was one of the longest winning streaks in the history of college basketball in terms of winning seasons. It was the second longest of all time behind UCLA. And it even predated Boeheim. Mike with a great point here. Jesse's broken wrist. Yeah, when Jesse broke his wrist, and as Kevin says, the growth of Jesse Edwards as a player, you didn't – Jesse's improvement, a lot of you saying that that's what you're going to remember about this season. And I think that's a great point here. But you didn't just want to pack it in and go home. But when Jesse hurt his wrist, and as it turns out in that Boston College game, and we didn't even know until a day later that he'd even gotten hurt in that game, you kind of knew that kind of sunk their battleship right there. And man, he was on a tear. And that is something I cannot wait to see next year. Joey brings up a good point. 0-11 against quad 1 teams this year. Yeah, you got to beat quad 1 teams if you're going to be in that conversation at this point. So Jesse comes back next year. Now, again, the transfer portal's out there. You got to put that asterisk on this conversation. But I don't think Syracuse is going to get hit that hard in the transfer portal at this point. Matt brings it up here too. How many 10-plus point leads were blown this year? About 6 or 7. Holding those leads would have made this season a different story. Inbounds plays, right? So it's just, Billy Joel sang it once, darling, I don't know why I go to extremes. That's kind of what I think about. It was the season of extremes. This team was either doing what it did today, or it was just, screwing up games at the end, injuries happening, just all kinds of wild stuff. Jim Boeheim calling in my radio show saying, as a matter of fact, there is a plan for me to retire, and it's not my decision who gets the job, but we know what the plan is. It's just like, man, what else can come your way? Never doubt the drama that Syracuse basketball can bring on the court, off the court, and everything in between. But going back to next year, so let's, again, assuming nobody hops in the portal here, Joe Girard is back. Symir Torrance is back. Jesse Edwards is back. That's a core three right there. Let's hope Cole Swider comes back, but, we'll leave that up to him. Now you're mixing in a lot of freshmen. A Chris Bunch, who's a top 100 player. We mentioned Justin Taylor, Kadir Copeland, Peter Carey, who is a top he's a prospect. He's, 6'11" guy. There's always that, 6'11", 7-footer or so. That's the project on the SU roster, right? Malik Brown is a part of that freshman class. Judah Mintz is somebody they're going after hard. That'd be a huge pickup for Syracuse as a combo guard. Does a John Bull come back? Does a Frank Anselm come back next year? John Bull already went in the portal once, didn't have a lot of luck there, ends up coming back. So it's going to be an interesting mix of youth and experience. And I would imagine Syracuse is going to add a player or two in the transfer portal. We'll keep an eye out there, and it's probably a destination where you can slip in at certain positions. So thinking about next year is going to be interesting at this point. Michael Antonio, if not the NIT, got to do the CBI. I don't think Syracuse is going to play in the CBI. I really don't. I think they'll just kind of walk away and let the season end as it is, but I could be wrong. They're competitors, and maybe they'll want to do this thing. Kelly said, Brent, would starting guards of Symir and Joe next year literally be the smallest backcourt? It might be. That's the disadvantage there. You'd have a pretty small top of the zone with those two up there. Rob, another guy who's been with us pretty much every game, and appreciate that, sir, says today's a perfect example of the fight and determination of what we've seen all year. It just wasn't our year overall, but they never quit, which is a sign of great coaching. Boeheim's still one of the best, regardless of the record. The only questionable determination that comes to mind is trying to make a GMAC out of a JG3. Excited for next year. Let's see here. Mike says it here. Jesse going down right after he did Axe. It looks like that, and it was pretty much over at that point. Yeah, you hate to say the season was over, but it just kind of reminded me in one sense of when AO went down in, 2010? That was a much better team. That team could have won the national championship, frankly. But when he got hurt speaking of which, the conference tournament, he got hurt against Georgetown in the Big East tournament. You kind of knew that took the air out of their sail. Now, they still made a pretty deep run in that tournament, but that was a Final Four team, at the very least, in my opinion, national championship team. With Jesse, this team could have made a run to the tournament. I think they could have picked up some of those quad one wins, been in the conversation. He would have been huge today, guarding Mark Williams in the paint. It's always a question with Jesse in terms of the foul trouble, but he just got so much better down the stretch. I think he could be an all-ACC player next year, as Buddy was this year for Syracuse. And as we said, just breaks your heart to see Buddy end his career like this. Of all the scenarios you could come up with, I wrote this in my column today that's up on syracuse.com. It's been a wild couple of years. I don't know if you guys have noticed that in the world, right? But the last scenario you could present to me that would lead up to Buddy Boeheim's last ever game at Syracuse would be a game that he couldn't play in, punching a guy, and suspended by the ACC because of that. There is no way on God's green earth I would ever believe you. I would take your temperature. I would say, what kind of drugs are you taking? Where can I get some of that? Right? It's just wild to think about, but that's exactly what happened. Just crazy that again, could be, if they don't end up in a postseason tournament here, his last game, just absolutely nuts. I forgot to mention Benny earlier. Just catching up with the comments here. Sorry about that, guys. I skipped over Benny. Benny, by all accounts, will be on this team next year. My fault on that one. That was certainly an oversight on my part, but he will be back. He said it twice on the record. Everybody kind of reserves the right not to return to this team. People were asking about that, by the way. I should clarify. I love the Buffalo Bills reference here, Chris. Buddy was like Steve Tasker's last game. Got thrown out for touching a ref, just as bad as Buddy. Little Bills reference there. I like that. But Benny didn't travel with the team. They wanted to be cautious. He's got a lower leg injury. Sometimes you don't want to put people on the bench and have somebody run into him or something and make that injury a more complex situation, I guess, for lack of a better term. Jesse Edwards wasn't on the bench for a game or two, so that's why he was not there, for those of you wondering about that. And my bad forgetting to mention his name earlier. Scott, you saw it. It happened. We all saw it. There's a term for this. I'm not sure what it's called. You guys can maybe help me out with this. So there is a term where it's like when people have a collective experience and then they basically have a hard time explaining it to those that weren't there. Like, there was a story of I'm going to get weird on you for a second here, but I just remember reading about this recently. There was an elementary school in South Africa, and they all, like literally hundreds of people, claimed they saw a UFO, right? But nobody could validate it. They couldn't get video of it or anything. So they had that collective experience, but nobody else believes them. What you just said about man-to-man defense, I think we're all going to remember that. Like, did that really happen? Did we really see it? Did we see Syracuse play man-to-man for the first time since they lost to Lemoyne back in 2010 in an exhibition game? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Yes, we did. We saw it, and we're going to see it next year, according to Jim Boeheim, right? So we did see it. Weird stuff, but we saw it. Dennis says, Brent, here's a legit question. If Buddy got teed up and ejected from the game yesterday, wouldn't he have been suspended for today's game as well? So, Dennis, if he got a flagrant 2 thrown out of the game, that would have satisfied the ejection, and he would be eligible for today. If he got a flagrant 1, I wonder if the ACC would circle back and suspend him, because flagrant 1 does not get you tossed out. So that was probably the ideal situation for Syracuse, frankly. How about Teddy Valentine screwing over Syracuse for once by not making a call? Had Buddy got the flagrant 2 yesterday, which he could have, it's referee discretion. He gets tossed. He plays today. Okay, Sarah, whatever will be. Just a weird thing there. And the fact to think about that, that's how Buddy ends his career. It's just, that's a bummer, man. That's a bummer. But how about Jimmy stepping up today with 28 points? I got you, bro. Goes out there, and what a performance from him. And I think it's great that if in fact this is the last game, Syracuse goes out on a high note. They didn't win, of course, but they gave it all they had. It wasn't just another kind of get blown out by Duke situation. So now we wait. Yeah, David, I'll take credit for that. I will take credit for that. It was just subliminal messages to Boeheim. And after a while, those subliminal messages settle in. Man to man, man to man, man to man. And then there it was today. It took about 12 years, but, we made it happen. And there it is from Antonio, man to man versus Duke. And no one died. In fact, we did well. We're all still here, unless we've crossed over into that weird alternate universe with all these wacky things happening, right? We're all okay. The world didn't end. We played man-to-man. As Michelle asked, do you think Duke struggled with the Q's triangle D today? Michelle, I think they absolutely did. And you know who agrees? Boxing 1, too, as Michael Antonio notes in the comments there. I do know that because John Shire was interviewed at halftime, the Duke assistant coach, the incoming head coach for if and when Duke ends their season, of course, and Coach K goes into full retirement. He said Syracuse mixing up those defenses was a problem. They didn't see it coming, but Duke adjusted to that by going inside a ton in the second half. And so we don't care what defense you're playing. You can't stop Mark Williams and Bencaro. Roach was big from the outside. Wendell Moore Jr. getting in the paint. So Duke was kind of messing around, trying to hit a bunch of threes in the first half that were wide open. Didn't hit them, adjusted, and we saw what we saw in the second half there, but definitely threw them off at that point. All right, guys. Well, I'll tell you what do you say we end there for today? And like we said, I think it said well here. Don't want to see it end. Such a long way to the fall, right? But let me tell you about a few things going on. So usually here on Thursdays, we do a little program called Orange Weekly, 1 o'clock on Thursday. So all you guys that have been here for postgame, come hang on Orange Weekly. We're going to be doing that, tracking Syracuse basketball offseason moves. Syracuse spring football is underway. For all you lacrosse fans out there, a lot of lacrosse talk. So Thursdays, 1 o'clock, live here on the same bat time, same bat channels. And if you missed the show, like the post-game show, the YouTube clip, you can find it on syracuse.com, on these channels themselves, on my Twitter feed, lots of places to find it if you miss it. So come hang during Orange Weekly, Thursdays, 1 o'clock live, or watch it on your time, right? So we'll be doing that, and we'll be tracking everything going on as things kind of wind down here as the season goes. And it just feels like there's always something going on, right? So we'll kind of put our full focus on football and lacrosse, but also tracking what happens in recruiting with Judah Mintz, what happens with the transfers, and just all the wild stuff that seems to come up around Syracuse basketball. But thank you. Can't thank you guys enough for being here game after game. This all started way back in November. Think of all the holidays we go through, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. A lot of things thrown in there in between and the ups and downs of a season. But here we were talking about it. And I'm going to highlight you guys because I want to thank you. Thank you so much for all your great comments and all your loyalty watching the show. It was a ton of fun. Stay in touch. You know how to get in touch with me on Twitter and email and everything. And hope you guys are reading the columns and all the fun stuff that we do. So stay in touch over the offseason if, in fact, this is the last game. But, if Syracuse ends up in the NIT or keeps playing, then you might see me again here. But we're going to have to track that because I'm not quite sure they're going to be in the postseason. So thank you once again. Thanks for hanging today. What a game for the Orange. What an effort today. And even though they lose, I think the Orange go out on a high note here if, in fact, today was the last game of the season, which it very likely will be. This has been Syracuse basketball post game. A big thank you. Big thank you. We will bow to them, our friends at Krause Health, for sponsoring the show. They've been our sponsor for the past few years, and we really appreciate their support. So big thank you to our friends at Krause Health as well. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, okay? We'll be back at it here sometime soon. We don't know when, but sometime soon on Syracuse basketball post game presented by our friends at Krause Health. Thanks, everyone.